It had been 3 days since Henry's German Shepherd vanished into the blizzard, and with every passing hour his fear grew heavier, until the fourth morning, when he opened the door and froze, seeing his dog curled tightly on the porch beside a wounded police officer, both nearly frozen to death. And what Henry never expected was that this officer was the same man who had once saved his son's life during a violent robbery and who had just risked his own life to rescue Henry's dog from a dog trafficking ring. A man who was ambushed during the fight, whose patrol car was burned somewhere in the forest, and who would have died in the storm if the dog everyone believed was lost had not guided him through the snow to the only place she knew as home. Before we begin, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and leave a like. Your support truly means the world to us. Thank you. Pine Hollow, Montana, lay buried under a fresh, merciless blanket of snow. The storm had finally passed sometime before dawn, leaving behind a silence so complete it felt unnatural, as if the mountains themselves were holding their breath. It was early morning on the fourth day after the blizzard began, the sky a dull, colorless gray, the air so cold it burned the lungs with every breath. Wind no longer howled, but the cold remained, heavy and unmoving, pressing down on the small wooden houses scattered along the edge of the forest. Henry Caldwell stood just inside the front door of his cabin, his hand resting on the old iron handle, hesitant. He was 68 years old, a retired carpenter who had spent most of his life building things meant to last, yet in this moment he felt unbearably fragile. For 3 days he had opened this door again and again, each time hoping, each time dreading, and each time finding nothing but snow and emptiness. His shoulders sagged under the weight of exhaustion and fear that sleep had not touched. His beard was untrimmed, his eyes sunken, his movements slower than they had been just a week ago. 3 days ago, his German Shepherd, Eli, had vanished into the storm. Eli was 6 years old, a working-breed German Shepherd with sharp instincts and an unshakable bond to Henry. The dog had come into Henry's life after his wife passed away, filling the cabin with sound and purpose again. Eli was not just a pet. He was a companion, a guardian, and, in many ways, the reason Henry still forced himself out of bed every morning. Losing him felt like losing the last solid piece of the life Henry had left. Henry finally pulled the door open. Cold air rushed in, biting hard, carrying with it the sharp scent of pine and frozen earth. At first, all he saw was white. Snow piled high against the porch railing, covering the steps, swallowing the familiar shapes of his yard. Then his eyes adjusted, and his heart lurched so violently he had to grab the doorframe to steady himself. Eli was there. The dog lay curled tightly on the wooden porch, his black and tan coat stiff with ice, his body drawn inward as if trying to protect what little warmth he had left. Snow clung to his fur, melting slowly now that the storm had ended, leaving dark patches beneath. Eli's sides rose and fell, shallow but unmistakably alive. For a single, fragile second, relief flooded Henry so hard his knees nearly buckled. Then he saw the man beside him. A young police officer lay half on his side, half on his back, one arm stretched toward Eli as if he had collapsed mid-reach. Snow covered his uniform, filling the folds of his jacket, crusted around his boots. His face was pale beneath a layer of frost, lips tinged blue, breath barely visible in the cold air. A dark, frozen stain marked the shoulder of his uniform where blood had soaked through and then solidified. Henry's breath caught painfully in his throat. "Oh, God," he whispered, the words tearing free before he could stop them. He stepped out onto the porch, the boards creaking beneath his boots. The cold seeped through his socks instantly, but he didn't notice. He knelt beside Eli first, pressing a shaking hand into the thick fur at the dog's neck. Eli stirred, just barely, his ears twitching, his eyes fluttering open for a fraction of a second before closing again. His tail moved, weakly brushing against the snow. "You're here," Henry murmured, his voice breaking. "You came back." Only then did he turn fully to the officer. The man looked to be in his early 30s, perhaps 34 or 35, with the solid build of someone used to long shifts and physical work. Even unconscious, there was a tension in his posture, as if his body had not yet accepted that the danger had passed. Henry noticed the police insignia on his jacket, the badge partially obscured by ice. He brushed snow away with trembling fingers, revealing the name stitched just beneath it. Lucas Reed. The name hit Henry like a blow. No, it can't be, he whispered. Lucas Reed was not a stranger. 2 years earlier, Henry's son, Noah Caldwell, had nearly lost his life during a late-night robbery at a gas station on the outskirts of Pine Hollow. Noah, then 27, had been cornered by an armed man desperate enough to pull the trigger. Lucas Reed, a patrol officer barely into his career, had been the first on the scene. He hadn't waited for backup. He had stepped between the gun and Noah without hesitation, taking the risk that had saved Henry's only child. Henry remembered Lucas from the hospital afterward. Calm, polite, almost uncomfortable with the praise. A man who did his job and never talked about it again. And now that same man lay dying on Henry's porch. Henry pressed his fingers against Lucas's neck, searching desperately for a pulse. It was there, weak, thready, but present. Relief and terror tangled together in Henry's chest until he could barely breathe. They froze out here, he muttered to himself, his mind racing. Both of them. They froze out here trying to survive the night. As he leaned closer, Henry noticed more details. Scratches along Lucas's forearm, torn fabric near the elbow, the kind of injuries that didn't come from falling in snow. He saw the stiff angle of Lucas's shoulder, the way the blood had seeped from beneath the jacket, and something cold settled in Henry's gut. This man hadn't just been caught in the storm. He had been hurt before it ever reached its worst. Henry's thoughts drifted back, unbidden, to the moment Eli had run from the house 3 nights earlier. The wind had already begun to rise then, snow drifting sideways across the clearing. Henry had called Eli back, irritated, worried, but the dog had stopped at the edge of the porch and looked back only once. His ears were high, his body tense, nose lifted as if catching a scent Henry couldn't perceive. Then Eli had turned and disappeared into the swirling white. Henry had told himself the dog would come back. He always did. But by morning, Eli was gone, and the storm had swallowed everything. Now, looking at the wounded officer and his dog lying side by side, something began to take shape in Henry's mind, something heavy and terrifying. Whatever had drawn Eli into the storm had not been chance. And whatever Lucas Reed had faced out there had nearly cost him his life. Henry pushed himself to his feet, ignoring the way his joints screamed in protest. Standing in the doorway, he took one last look at the 2 figures on his porch, the dog he had mourned and the man he owed everything to, and felt a surge of fierce determination cut through his fear. "Hold on," he said aloud, his voice rough but steady now. "Both of you. Just hold on." He turned back into the cabin, already reaching for blankets, already planning how to drag them inside, unaware that this moment, this impossible reunion in the aftermath of the storm, was only the beginning of a truth far darker and a bond far deeper than he could yet imagine. Henry did not remember deciding what to do next. His body simply moved, driven by a kind of instinct that felt older than thought. He hauled the heavy door open wider, then dragged the thick wool blankets from the bench by the wall back onto the porch. First Eli, because the dog was lighter and because Henry could not bear to leave him in the cold for another second. He wrapped the German shepherd tightly, murmuring his name over and over, and pulled him across the threshold, the dog's claws scraping weakly against the wood as if apologizing for the effort. Eli let out a faint sound, not quite a whine, and Henry felt something inside his chest loosen, just enough to keep him breathing. Lucas Reed was harder. Henry grunted with the strain as he hooked his arms under the officer's shoulders and dragged him inch by inch into the cabin. The man was solid, heavier than Henry expected, his body stiff from cold and injury. Snow broke loose from his uniform in chunks, melting instantly against the warm floor. Henry shut the door with his heel, sealing the cold outside, and for the first time since opening it that morning, he allowed himself to believe they might survive. He worked quickly, methodically, the way he had learned to do after decades of fixing things that were already half broken. He laid Lucas flat near the fireplace, propping his head slightly, then piled blankets over him until only his face remained visible. Eli crawled closer, dragging his wrapped body until he was pressed against the officer's side. Henry noticed it then, how the dog angled himself, how his nose stayed near Lucas's shoulder, how his body curved protectively around the man as if shielding him from something unseen. "Easy," Henry whispered, though he wasn't sure who he was speaking to. "You're both inside now." Henry reached for the phone on the kitchen wall, his fingers stiff and clumsy as he dialed for emergency services. He spoke fast, voice shaking but clear, explaining the injuries, the exposure, the storm. When he hung up, his hands trembled so badly he had to press them together to steady himself. Help was on the way, but in Pine Hollow, help never came quickly in winter. He knelt beside Lucas and studied his face more carefully. The officer was in his mid-30s, Henry guessed, old enough to carry weariness in the set of his jaw, young enough to still look surprised by pain. There was a faint scar near his temple Henry hadn't noticed before, a pale line that spoke of an older incident, another day when things had gone wrong. Lucas's breathing was shallow, uneven, but it was there. Henry reached for a towel, dampened it with warm water, and gently wiped ice from Lucas's lashes and cheeks. As he worked, memory rose unbidden, sharp and vivid. 2 years earlier, Henry had been standing in the harsh light of a hospital hallway. His son, Noah, slumped in a chair beside him, shaking so badly he couldn't hold a cup of water. Noah was 29 now, a schoolteacher in town, but that night he had looked like a frightened child again. The robbery had been senseless, wrong place, wrong time. A man with a gun, eyes wild with desperation. Everything could have ended there. Then Lucas Reed had stepped in. Henry remembered seeing the officer afterward, uniform torn, adrenaline still burning off him in waves. Lucas had waved off thanks, insisting anyone would have done the same, but Henry knew better. Not everyone ran toward danger. Not everyone stood between a stranger and a bullet. Now that same man lay on Henry's floor, broken by cold and violence, alive only because of the dog Henry had almost given up for dead. "This isn't random," Henry muttered, the thought taking shape fully for the first time. "It can't be." Eli shifted again, pressing his head against Lucas's arm. The dog's eyes were half-lidded, unfocused with exhaustion, but his body remained tense, alert in a way Henry recognized. Eli was guarding him. Henry moved to the stove and set water to heat, then returned with another blanket, layering it carefully over Eli. The dog's ears flicked as Henry touched him, and he opened his eyes just long enough to look at Lucas before letting them close again. It was a small thing, but it struck Henry hard. Eli had been through something terrible out there, something that had cost him nearly everything, and still his instinct was to protect. "Whatever you did," Henry said quietly, his voice thick, "you didn't do it alone." The siren came faintly through the trees sometime later, distant but growing closer. Before it arrived, Henry heard another sound, the crunch of boots on snow outside. The knock on the door was sharp, urgent. Dr. Margaret Sloane stood on Henry's porch when he opened it, her breath puffing white in the cold. She was 56, the town's only general practitioner, practical and unsentimental, with decades of experience patching up loggers, hunters, and stubborn old men who waited too long to seek help. She took in the scene with a single glance, her expression tightening. "You did right calling," she said, already shrugging out of her coat. "Show me." She moved quickly, kneeling beside Lucas, checking his pulse, his pupils, the stiffness of his limbs. She spoke aloud as she worked, partly for Henry, partly for herself, naming symptoms, ruling out others. Hypothermia, blood loss, shock. "He's lucky," she said finally, though there was no softness in her tone. "Luckier than he has any right to be." "And the dog?" Henry asked, nodding toward Eli. Dr. Sloane examined him next, her touch firm but gentle. Exhausted, cold, dehydrated, but alive. She glanced at Henry. very much alive. The ambulance arrived soon after, lights cutting through the gray morning. Paramedics took over with practiced efficiency, lifting Lucas onto a stretcher, wrapping Eli more securely. As they worked, Henry caught a fragment of conversation. Burned-out patrol vehicle found miles away, signs of a struggle in the snow. Words that confirmed what Henry had already begun to understand. As they prepared to load Lucas into the ambulance, Eli stirred, struggling weakly against the blankets. He let out a low, distressed sound, his paws scraping uselessly at the stretcher. "It's all right," Henry said quickly, moving closer. "He's not leaving you." One of the paramedics, a young man with tired eyes, hesitated. "The dog can ride with us," he said after a moment, "given the circumstances." Eli settled instantly when they placed him beside Lucas, his head pressing against the officer's chest as if drawn there by gravity. Henry watched them go, the ambulance doors closing with a heavy finality, and felt a strange mixture of fear and relief wash through him. The cabin felt too quiet without them. Henry sank into a chair, hands clasped, staring at the floor where snow still melted in small dark pools. The events of the morning replayed in his mind, slotting together into a pattern he could no longer ignore. Eli hadn't run into the storm without reason. Lucas hadn't been out there by accident, and the fact that both of them had come back to his door, alive, felt like something more than coincidence. For the first time since the blizzard began, Henry allowed himself to believe that the storm had not only taken things away, it had brought something back, a debt repaid, a connection renewed. He stood slowly, heart heavy but steady, and reached for his coat. There were questions now, and answers waiting somewhere beyond the snow. Henry Caldwell arrived at the hospital just after sunrise, his body moving on habit rather than rest. He had spent the night pacing his cabin, replaying the image of Eli and the wounded officer on his porch, unable to silence the fear that one or both of them might slip away before morning. The drive into town felt longer than usual, every mile weighed down by questions he had no answers for yet. At the nurse's station, he waited in rigid silence until someone finally looked up from the chart. When the nurse confirmed that both the officer and the dog were alive, Henry felt his knees weaken with relief he had no words for. He thanked her quietly and followed her directions down the hallway, his footsteps slowing as he reached the door. Lucas Reed lay in the hospital bed, pale and motionless except for the steady rise and fall of his chest. He was 34 years old, a county patrol officer known for taking the late shifts others avoided. His upbringing had been unsettled, marked by frequent moves and long absences from his parents, and over time he had learned to rely on discipline rather than comfort. That same discipline showed even now, in the way his body seemed to hold itself together despite the injuries. Curled beside the bed, wrapped in a hospital blanket, was Eli. The German shepherd looked smaller than Henry remembered, his strength temporarily stripped away by exhaustion and cold. Yet, even in sleep, his body remained angled toward Lucas, one paw resting against the man's side as if anchoring him there. Henry took a chair and sat down slowly. For a long moment, he simply watched them breathe. Lucas stirred first. His eyelids fluttered, then opened halfway, unfocused. It took a few seconds before recognition settled in. "Henry?" he said, his voice rough and strained. "I'm here," Henry replied, leaning forward. "You're safe, both of you." Lucas exhaled, a faint tension easing from his shoulders. "Good." Eli lifted his head at the sound of Lucas's voice and shifted closer, pressing his body more firmly against the bed. Henry noticed how Lucas's breathing steadied almost immediately, as if the dog's presence alone was enough to keep him grounded. A nurse entered briefly, checked the monitors, and spoke in a calm, practiced tone. She explained that Lucas had suffered significant blood loss, a shoulder injury, and hypothermia, but his condition was stable. After she left, the room grew quiet again. Henry hesitated before speaking. "When you're able," he said carefully, "I need to understand what happened out there." Lucas closed his eyes for a moment, gathering strength. When he spoke again, his voice was low but deliberate. I was on patrol, late shift. Weather was already bad, but not dangerous yet. Henry listened without interrupting. I noticed a van pulled off the road, Lucas continued. No hazard lights, engine running. That alone was enough to stop. He swallowed. Then I heard barking. Not one dog, several. Lucas explained how he approached the vehicle cautiously and discovered multiple dogs confined in metal cages, stacked tightly in the back. Some were injured, others severely weakened from exposure. Among them, tied and restrained, was Eli. I recognized him immediately, Lucas said. He didn't belong there. Henry's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. I radioed for backup, Lucas went on. Dispatch said units were delayed because of the storm. They told me to wait. His eyes opened briefly, meeting Henry's. I didn't. Lucas described confronting the men at the van. At first, they attempted to flee, but when they realized he was alone, they turned violent. The fight was fast and brutal, taking place on unstable ground already slick with ice. I went down hard, Lucas said. Got back up. Thought I could hold them off. He shook his head slightly. I was wrong. Henry could hear the effort it took for Lucas to continue. They hit me from behind, Lucas said. I felt my shoulder tear, blood everywhere. I couldn't keep my balance. His jaw clenched. They panicked after that. Lucas explained how the men abandoned the dogs and cages, setting his patrol car on fire to destroy evidence before disappearing into the storm. They assumed the cold would finish the job, Lucas said quietly, that I wouldn't make it through the night. Henry felt a cold anger settle in his chest, heavy and controlled. And Eli? Henry asked. Lucas's gaze shifted downward, resting on the dog beside him. They left him tied. I don't know how long I was out after that. He paused, breath hitching slightly. When I came to, the rope was gone. Eli's ears flicked at the sound of Lucas's voice. He chewed through it, Lucas said. Came back for me. Henry closed his eyes briefly, emotion tightening his throat. I tried to push him away, Lucas continued. Told him to run, he wouldn't. His voice softened, almost disbelieving. He stayed. Lucas did not open his eyes when he began to speak. He lay back against the pillows, one arm immobilized, his voice low and uneven, as if pulling each word up from somewhere cold and heavy. Henry sat beside the bed, hands folded tightly, listening without interrupting. Eli remained pressed against Lucas's side, awake now, ears shifting subtly with every change in tone. I don't remember deciding to follow him, Lucas said. I don't think I was capable of deciding anything at that point. I just knew that every time I opened my eyes, he was there, standing in front of me, waiting. Henry nodded once, urging him on. The storm got worse fast, Lucas continued. Wind so loud it drowned out everything else. Snow hitting my face hard enough to sting. I tried to stand more than once and failed. His jaw tightened slightly. I went down hard, shoulder first. He paused, breathing shallowly. Eli lifted his head and nudged Lucas's arm, the movement small but deliberate. That's when he came back, Lucas said. Every time. I'd fall, and he'd circle me like he was counting the seconds. When I didn't move, he grabbed my jacket and pulled. Henry's throat tightened. He dragged you? Lucas nodded faintly. Not far. Just enough. Enough to make sure I didn't stay still. A weak exhale escaped him. I didn't understand it at the time, but he wasn't trying to get me somewhere all at once. He was just keeping me alive, step by step. Lucas described how he would manage a few steps before collapsing again, how the cold crept deeper with every fall, numbing first his hands, then his thoughts. Each time, Eli returned, tugging at his clothing, whining softly, refusing to leave him where he lay. There was a moment, Lucas said quietly, when I thought lying down wouldn't be so bad. Just for a minute. The cold makes it feel reasonable. Henry shifted in his chair, recognizing the danger in that statement. He stood right in front of me, Lucas went on, blocked my view completely, wouldn't let me settle. When I tried to sink down, he shoved me back upright, growled at me, not angry, just firm. Eli's tail moved once, slow and restrained. "I remember laughing," Lucas said, the sound almost incredulous. "I told him he was stubborn. He didn't care. He just kept staring at me like he was daring me to argue." Henry swallowed hard. "And you didn't." "No," Lucas replied. "I didn't." Lucas explained how the storm erased everything behind them, how there were no tracks, no sense of direction left to him. He had no idea how far they had gone or how long it had taken. All he knew was that Eli never hesitated, never doubled back, never acted unsure. He wasn't wandering, Lucas said. He knew exactly where he was going. Henry's hands tightened together. "Home." "Yes," Lucas said softly. "Your place." He moved like he was following something I couldn't see. Scent, memory, maybe both. Lucas described the point where his legs stopped responding altogether, where even standing became an act of will rather than muscle. He told Henry how he had leaned against a tree, barely aware of what he was doing, and how Eli had pressed his body into Lucas's side to keep him upright. "I remember thinking I was slowing him down," Lucas admitted, "that if he left me, he'd survive." His voice roughened. "He never even considered it." Eli shifted closer at that, resting his chin briefly on Lucas's forearm. "He wouldn't go ahead without me," Lucas continued. "Wouldn't let the distance grow. Every time I lagged, he was back at my side, pushing, pulling, waiting." Henry closed his eyes briefly, the image carving itself into him. "At some point," Lucas said, "I smelled smoke, just a trace. I thought it was my imagination." He paused. But Eli reacted immediately, picked up his pace. That was the first time I felt hope. Lucas described how the smell grew stronger, how his steps became more deliberate despite the pain, how Eli no longer looked back as often because he no longer needed to. The destination was close. "I don't remember reaching the porch," Lucas admitted. "I remember stumbling. Then cold wood under my hands. Then nothing." Henry exhaled slowly. "You collapsed there." "Yes." Lucas turned his head slightly toward Eli. He stayed. Lucas fell silent after that, the effort of speaking clearly having drained what little energy he had left. His breathing evened out as exhaustion reclaimed him. Not unconsciousness this time, but rest. Henry remained where he was, staring at the dog curled protectively against the officer who had nearly died beside him. The truth had settled fully now. Eli had not simply survived the storm. He had guided a wounded man through it, refusing to let him give up, refusing to leave him behind, trusting instinct and memory over fear. Henry reached out slowly and rested his hand on Eli's back. "You brought him home," he whispered. Eli did not move, but his breathing deepened, steady and calm. Henry leaned back in his chair, understanding at last that the long walk through the storm had not been a miracle of strength, but of resolve. One choice repeated again and again in the dark until home finally appeared. Henry brought Lucas home 3 days after the doctors agreed he was stable enough to leave the hospital. It was not a discussion so much as a decision quietly made by all of them. Lucas could not lift his arm properly, his balance was still unreliable, and the idea of sending him back to an empty apartment felt wrong in a way Henry could not explain without sounding sentimental. So Henry drove him back to the cabin, helped him inside, and set up a bed near the fireplace, close enough that Eli could lie at his side without needing to choose. Henry cared for Lucas the way he once cared for his wife during her final months, with calm routines and careful attention, never asking whether the effort was too much. He prepared meals Lucas could manage with one hand, helped him with medication schedules, and stayed nearby when pain made sleep difficult. He did these things without ceremony, as if Lucas had always belonged there, as if taking care of him was not an act of repayment but something older and more instinctive. Lucas noticed, of course. He tried to protest at first, insisting he could manage, that Henry didn't owe him anything. Henry waved it away every time. "You're here," he said simply. "That's enough." Eli stayed close, rarely more than a few feet from Lucas, his body still bearing the quiet tension of a guardian who had not yet fully accepted that the danger was over. When Lucas shifted or grimaced, Eli reacted instantly, lifting his head, pressing closer, grounding him. Henry watched this with a mixture of awe and gratitude, understanding now that whatever bond had formed between them in the storm had not loosened just because they were safe. The call from Noah came that evening. Noah Caldwell was 29, a schoolteacher who lived 2 hours away, practical by nature and emotionally cautious in ways that mirrored his mother more than his father. When Henry told him what had happened, there was a long silence on the line, followed by a sharp intake of breath. Noah arrived the next morning, driving straight through the night without stopping. He stood in the doorway for a long moment when he entered the cabin, taking in the sight of Lucas resting near the fire and Eli lying protectively beside him. Recognition crossed his face slowly, then disbelief. "It's him," Noah said quietly. "The officer." Lucas shifted, pushing himself upright with effort. "Hey," he said, managing a faint smile. Noah stepped forward, stopping just short of the bed. "You saved my life," he said, the words heavy and unpolished. 2 years ago. You probably don't remember me." "I do," Lucas replied. "Gas station. You kept your head. That mattered." Noah swallowed hard. "And now you saved our dog." Lucas shook his head slightly. "Eli saved me." Noah turned to Henry then, his voice thick. "I used to say it was just a job," he admitted. "Being a cop. I said it was dangerous and unnecessary, like it was something people chose because they didn't think things through." He looked back at Lucas. "I was wrong." Lucas said nothing, but the tension in his shoulders eased a fraction. That night, the 3 men sat together, the fire burning low, Eli stretched out between them like a bridge that needed no explanation. The conversation came slowly, unfolding in pieces rather than speeches. Henry spoke first, his voice steady but distant, as if recalling something fragile. He told Lucas about his wife, Margaret, about the years they spent building the cabin, about the quiet that followed her death. He spoke of how the house had felt too large afterward, how days blurred together until Eli arrived and filled the silence with purpose again. "I thought I'd already lost everything that mattered," Henry said softly. "When Eli ran into that storm, I didn't know how I would stand another loss." Lucas listened without interrupting, his gaze fixed on the fire. When it was his turn, Lucas hesitated longer. "I don't talk about this much," he said finally. "There wasn't anyone to talk to." He explained that he'd been raised in foster care, moving from house to house, never staying long enough to be claimed. His parents had struggled with addiction and disappeared early, leaving behind records but no memories worth holding on to. By the time he was old enough to understand what family was supposed to be, he had already learned not to expect it. "I joined the force because it gave me structure," Lucas said. "Rules. Accountability. A place to belong that didn't depend on anyone wanting me there." Henry absorbed this quietly, his expression unreadable. "I never thought much about being part of a family," Lucas continued. "I figured some people just don't get that version of life." The fire crackled softly between them. Eli shifted in his sleep, tail thumping once against the floor. Noah spoke then, his voice quieter than usual. "You're part of ours," he said, as if stating something obvious. Lucas looked up sharply. "Noah." "I mean it," Noah said. "You didn't have to step in that night. You didn't have to stop that van. You didn't have to fight those men." He exhaled slowly. "But you did. Twice." Henry nodded once, the motion decisive. "Blood makes relatives," he said. "Choice makes family." Lucas had no answer for that. His eyes dropped back to the fire, and for a long moment he said nothing at all. From that night on, something shifted. The cabin no longer felt like a place of recovery, but of belonging. Lucas stopped apologizing for needing help. Henry stopped pretending he was doing Lucas a favor. Noah extended his stay, rearranging work obligations without explanation, as if this was where he was meant to be for now. In quiet moments, Lucas found himself noticing small things he had never allowed himself to want. Shared meals, unspoken understanding, the way Henry moved through the space as if Lucas's presence made sense. Eli seemed to notice too. His watchfulness softened, replaced by something calmer, more content. One afternoon, as Henry adjusted Lucas's sling, Lucas spoke without looking up. "I don't know how to repay this." Henry met his gaze steadily. "You already have." Lucas frowned. "How?" Henry gestured toward Noah, toward Eli, toward the fire. "By being here," he said. "By surviving." Lucas let out a breath that sounded suspiciously like relief. That evening, Noah stood on the porch with Henry, watching snow drift lazily from the sky, no longer threatening, just present. "You know," Noah said, "if Mom were here, she'd tell you this was always how it was supposed to be." Henry smiled faintly. She always did have a way of seeing things early. Inside, Lucas slept more peacefully than he had in years. Eli curled against his side, the weight of isolation finally lifted by something he hadn't known how to name until now. A debt older than blood had been acknowledged, not with words or contracts, but with care freely given and accepted. And, for the first time, all of them understood that what had begun in violence and snow had led them somewhere unexpectedly whole. Lucas did not return to duty the moment his sling came off, but he returned to purpose the moment he could walk without pain sharpening every step. Henry noticed the change before Lucas said anything. The stillness that had marked recovery gave way to focus, to the quiet readiness of a man who knew something unfinished was waiting. Eli sensed it, too. The German shepherd began waking before dawn again, pacing near the door, alert in a way that was no longer fear, but intent. When the call came, Lucas answered without hesitation. Detective Mara Collins arrived that afternoon. She was 42, lean in posture and precise in manner, a regional investigator assigned to organized animal trafficking cases. Her work had kept her moving between states for years, and it showed in the way she listened more than she spoke, collecting details with careful patience. She had read the incident report, seen the burned patrol car, cataloged the abandoned cages. What she needed now was what paper could not provide. Memory, instinct, scent. Lucas laid out what he remembered from the night of the storm, the van's partial plate, the arrangement of cages, the direction the men fled. It was fragmented, blurred by pain and cold, but Mara absorbed every piece. Then she turned her attention to Eli. "You think he can help us?" she said, not as a question. Lucas nodded. "He already has." They returned to the site 2 days later, not as a rescue mission this time, but as a search. The official teams moved methodically, but it was Eli who broke the pattern. The dog's posture changed the moment they stepped onto the frozen ground. His nose dropped, tail stiffened, body angling toward something only he could sense. Eli followed a scent trail that cut across the churned snow and ice, stopping often, circling, confirming. He reacted sharply to specific spots: oil stains soaked into dirt, faint metallic traces where cages had scraped the ground. Lucas watched closely, translating what he could for Mara. "He recognizes it," Lucas said. "Fuel, metal, the van." They followed Eli beyond the road, into a stretch of land few people bothered with anymore. The trail led to a derelict structure half hidden behind collapsed fencing. The building had once been a distribution warehouse, long abandoned, its official records forgotten. To Eli, it was anything but. The dog froze at the entrance. Inside, they found evidence that tightened every jaw in the room. Empty cages stacked haphazardly, food bowls overturned, drag marks across the concrete. This wasn't a one-time operation. It was a temporary holding site, used and discarded with calculated efficiency. Mara's voice dropped. "This isn't local," she said. "It's a hub." What emerged over the next 48 hours confirmed it. Phone records recovered from a discarded burner, shipping logs tied to shell companies, connections stretching across state lines, moving animals like cargo, erasing identities as easily as license plates. The network wasn't large, but it was careful, and careful groups were the hardest to catch. The plan formed quietly. They would not storm the warehouse, they would wait. Lucas insisted on being there when it happened. Henry argued, Noah backed him, and the doctors had opinions Lucas ignored. In the end, it was Mara who made the call. "He's not reckless," she said. "He's necessary." The night of the operation, teams positioned themselves in silence. Lucas stayed back, Eli at his side, both of them out of direct sight. The idea was simple. Let the traffickers return to move the remaining dogs, then close the net. The first sign came when Eli's ears snapped forward. Lucas felt it before he understood it. The air shifted. The dog's body tensed, not toward the warehouse, but behind them. "Contact," Lucas whispered into the radio. Too late. Figures emerged from the darkness faster than expected, cutting off retreat. The traffickers had anticipated interference and sent a secondary group to neutralize it. Lucas raised his weapon, backing toward cover, Eli tight against his leg. The attack came hard and close. Lucas went down under a blow he never saw coming. Pain flared, familiar and unwelcome. He rolled, struggling to rise as hands grabbed for him, trying to drag him away from the line of sight. Eli exploded into motion. The German Shepherd lunged without hesitation, teeth sinking into an arm, then another. The sudden violence shattered the attacker's rhythm. One shouted, another fell back, and in that chaos, a gate slammed open nearby. Dogs poured out. Not trained attack animals, not weapons, just dogs. Panicked, desperate, responding to Eli's call with raw instinct. They surged forward, barking, biting, scattering the men who had caged them. The scene dissolved into confusion, attackers retreating as the tide turned against them. Lucas crawled backward, forcing himself upright as backup arrived, weapons drawn, commands shouted. The fight ended quickly after that. When the noise settled, Eli returned to Lucas, body trembling with adrenaline, eyes searching. Lucas dropped to one knee and wrapped an arm around the dog's neck, breathing hard. "You did good," he whispered. "You did everything." By dawn, the arrests were complete. The network exposed, the dogs freed. Mara stood beside Lucas as the last transport van pulled away. "You know, this doesn't end with paperwork," she said. "It ends with testimony, courtrooms, long months." Lucas nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." Henry arrived later that morning. He didn't speak at first. He just looked at Lucas, then at Eli, then at the empty cages being loaded away. "You came back alive," Henry said finally. Lucas met his gaze. So did they. Eli sat between them, calm at last. The hunt had begun with a storm and ended with clarity. What remained now was accountability, and the knowledge that loyalty, once set in motion, could dismantle even the quietest cruelty. The arrests unfolded without spectacle, but their weight was unmistakable. By the time the last set of cuffs closed, the network that had operated quietly across counties was no longer quiet at all. Vehicles were impounded, records seized, and dozens of dogs, some injured, some merely exhausted, were cataloged, assessed, and guided toward safety. Lucas stood back from it, arm still stiff, watching order replace chaos. Eli sat at his heel, posture relaxed for the first time since the storm, as if something inside him had finally settled. The temporary holding area filled quickly. Volunteers moved with care, reading microchips, whispering reassurances, carrying bowls of water and blankets. One of the dogs, a brindled mixed breed with clouded eyes and a healed scar along its flank, stopped abruptly when it saw Eli. The dog froze, stared, then surged forward, tail sweeping the air in frantic arcs. It pressed its head into Eli's shoulder and whined, recognition unmistakable. Eli accepted the greeting calmly, touching noses once, steady and gentle. Lucas felt the knot in his chest tighten. Whatever had happened in those cages had not erased memory. It had not erased gratitude. News traveled faster than the snow ever had. By midday, reporters gathered beyond the perimeter. Cameras lifted, names were asked for, statements requested. The phrase appeared first in a local headline and spread from there. The dog who led a hero home. It was meant for Eli, but it followed Lucas too, braided together until neither could be mentioned without the other. Lucas avoided the microphones, letting officials speak to procedure and outcome. Eli, unaware of titles, accepted pats from gloved hands and leaned into them with a patience that felt earned. The town responded the way small towns do when something rare and decent surfaces all at once. Banners appeared in windows. A bakery put a bone-shaped pastry on the counter with a handwritten sign. The mayor issued a statement that tried and failed to be concise. When Lucas finally returned to Henry's cabin that evening, the porch light was on and stayed on long after they went inside, as if the house itself had learned a new habit. The ceremony was brief and practical, held 2 days later in the municipal hall. Lucas stood straight despite the ache that lingered in his shoulder. Eli lay at his feet, chin on paws, eyes half-lidded but alert. The police chief spoke of courage without embellishment. A representative from Animal Welfare thanked the teams. Applause came and went like weather, loud, then respectful, then gone. Afterward, the chief pulled Lucas aside. He was a man in his late 50s, measured, with a career shaped by compromises that rarely made headlines. "There's a recommendation on the table," he said. "A step up, different responsibilities. It's deserved." Lucas nodded, listening, but not committing. "I'll think about it." "You should," the chief said, meaning it kindly. Outside, a reporter tried once more. "Officer Reed, what made you go back in the storm?" Lucas looked down at Eli. "I wasn't going back," he said. "I was following." That night, Henry cooked without asking permission and set an extra place without comment. Noah arrived late, coat dusted with melting snow, eyes bright with something like pride he didn't bother to disguise. They ate slowly, talking about ordinary things until the ordinary felt solid again. Later, when the house had quieted, Henry poured 2 cups of coffee and set one within Lucas's reach. "They'll want more from you," he said. "Interviews, committees, offers." Lucas turned the mug in his hand. "I know." Henry studied him for a long moment. "What are you afraid of?" Lucas didn't answer right away. "I've always known where I stand when the rules are clear," he said finally. "Up means different rules, less groundwork, more distance." "And Eli?" Henry asked. Lucas glanced down. Eli lifted his head, meeting his eyes without question. "That's part of it," Lucas admitted. The next morning, a letter arrived from the department. Formal, supportive, carefully worded. It included the offer in writing. Lucas read it twice and set it aside. He took Eli out, walked the familiar path, let the dog choose the pace. When they returned, Lucas had made his decision, even if he hadn't named it yet. The town gathered again at the end of the week, not for ceremony, but for closure. Dogs left with fosters. Some reunited with families. Others began something new. The brindled dog from the holding area found a place with a retired couple who lived near the river. When it passed Eli on the way out, it paused, tail wagging once, then moved on. Eli watched it go, calm and satisfied. That afternoon, Lucas spoke to the chief. He accepted the commendation without hesitation and asked for time on the promotion. Not a refusal, not a yes. A pause. The chief nodded, understanding more than he said. "You've earned the right to choose," he replied. By evening, the cameras were gone. The snow returned to being snow. Eli slept deeply, the kind of sleep that came after purpose had been fulfilled. Lucas sat near him, letter folded in his pocket, thinking not about rank or recognition but about direction, where instinct had carried him before words ever did. Justice had arrived quietly, like it always should, not as spectacle, but as consequence. And in its wake something gentler remained. A town reminded of what loyalty looked like, a man reconsidering what success meant, and a dog who had done exactly what he was made to do. Lucas took longer than expected to say the word stay, but when he did, it felt final in the way good decisions often do, quiet, certain, unburdened by apology. The offer to transfer had remained open, the kind of opportunity that promised advancement without asking what it would cost. Lucas read the email once more, closed his phone, and placed it on the table between two cooling mugs of coffee. Henry watched from across the room without comment. Eli lay on the floor between them, stretched long, breathing slow, content. "I'm not going," Lucas said at last. "I'm staying in Pine Hollow." Henry nodded as if he'd known the answer before the question finished forming. "Good," he said simply. What followed did not feel like a ceremony. There were forms, yes, and appointments, and a lawyer in town who handled quiet things with discretion. Claire Wainwright was 56, precise in speech and gentle in manner, known for helping families shape themselves without spectacle. She listened more than she spoke, asked careful questions, and made no assumptions. When Lucas explained his history, foster homes, short stays, the long habit of leaving before he could be left, she did not flinch. When Henry spoke about his wife the years after, the silence that had pressed in, she nodded as if recognizing a familiar pattern. "This isn't about replacing anyone," Claire said. "It's about choosing to belong." The papers were signed on a morning that felt ordinary in the best way. No cameras, no speeches. Henry's hand shook only once as he put his name where it belonged. Lucas signed beneath it, slower, deliberate, as if giving the word family the respect it deserved. Eli, uninterested in ink and legality, placed his head on Lucas's knee and stayed there until it was done. That night, Henry cooked a meal he hadn't made in years. Not because the recipe was difficult, but because it required believing someone would be there to share it. Noah arrived early, sleeves rolled, chopping vegetables without being asked. He moved through the kitchen with ease now, as if the space had learned him again. When the table was set, it held more than plates. It held time, reclaimed. They ate slowly. There were stories, some familiar, some new. Noah told one from his classroom that ended with laughter. Lucas spoke about a call that had gone right for once, about the relief that came from seeing an ending instead of an aftermath. Henry listened, the way a man does when he realizes the present has finally caught up to his hopes. After dinner, Eli claimed the spot he had chosen weeks ago, settling on the rug before the fireplace. Lucas sat on one side, Henry on the other. The dog sighed once, deep and satisfied, and closed his eyes. The fire popped softly. Outside, snow fell without urgency, no longer an enemy, just a season doing what seasons do. Henry looked at them both and felt something loosen that he hadn't known how to name. The house, once too large, now fit. The rooms remembered voices. The silence had learned to rest instead of ache. Later, when Noah had left and the dishes were done, Henry spoke without preface. "I thought family was something you were given," he said. "Turns out it's something you build, sometimes out of what survives." Lucas stared into the fire. "I didn't think I'd ever have one," he said. "Not like this." Henry smiled, small and certain. "Neither did I." The days that followed were unremarkable in the way happy endings often are. Lucas returned to work on his terms. Not promoted, not diminished, present. The town adjusted, as towns do, letting stories become memory. The banner came down. The pastries returned to being just pastries. What remained was quieter. Neighbors who waved with meaning, doors left unlocked a little longer than before. Eli thrived in the space between routine and belonging. He slept where he pleased, chose walks by preference rather than duty, and kept his watch without tension. Sometimes, when the night was especially still, he rose and made a round of the house, checking corners, then returned to his place between Henry and Lucas, as if confirming the world remained as it should. One evening, Henry stood at the window and caught his reflection beside Lucas's. Two silhouettes, different lines, same steadiness. He thought of his wife and felt the familiar ache, lighter now, edged with gratitude. "She would have liked you," he said. Lucas didn't look away from the yard. "I'd have liked her. That's how I know," Henry replied. When spring arrived, it did so without announcement. Snow receded, paths softened. The lake broke free of ice. Lucas planted seedlings with Noah's help, hands dirty, laughing when Eli tried to assist by relocating tools. Henry watched from the porch, coffee in hand, and understood that what he felt was not relief alone, but fulfillment, the sense that something once lost had returned, not in the same shape, but in a better one. On a quiet afternoon, Claire stopped by with a small envelope. Inside was the final confirmation, the official language neat and complete. Henry tucked it into a drawer he opened rarely, the kind that held important things that didn't need to be seen every day. That night, as the fire settled into embers, Eli stretched and placed his head across both men's feet, a bridge he had built himself. Henry rested a hand on the dog's back. Lucas closed his eyes. No one spoke. They didn't need to. Henry thought, not for the first time, that sometimes family does not arrive through blood or time, but through storms, through the decision to keep moving, to keep each other upright, to follow what knows the way when everything else is erased. The cabin held that truth now, warm and steady, no longer lonely. Sometimes the greatest miracles do not come with thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they arrive quietly, through loyalty, through courage, through a heart that refuses to give up in the storm. This story reminds us that God often works through those who choose love over fear, sacrifice over comfort, and faith over despair. In our daily lives, we may feel lost, tired, or alone, but just like Henry, Lucas, and Eli, we are never truly abandoned. God sends help in unexpected forms, at unexpected moments, exactly when we need it most. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment below with your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel so we can continue sharing stories of faith, love, and miracles. May God bless you, protect your family, and guide you safely through every storm. If you believe, type Amen in the comments.